Thanks.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Mike ROADIS, and I've known Mike for a lot of years. He was the first HPTE director at CDOT, and has always been engaged in our corridor with I-25, and Johnny Olson, who's on the phone already. I think you're on as well, Johnny. And I see Tim Harris, who used to be the chief engineer, and Johnny Olson, who was deputy CDOT director. And we've just known all these people for a long time, and we're excited at least to have this proposal in front of HPTE. And the good news is HPTE moved it from one of their processes into the next one. I got sent the flow chart of all the things you guys have to do in order to get to the end of the line, and you're just starting, but we're really excited to have you come and talk to us about this, and I'm sure that there'll be some questions. So Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks very much, Karen. Good morning, everybody. Some of you I have met, some of you I know, some of you I have not. So good morning to everybody. I'd like to introduce briefly, before we get started, a couple of my colleagues, Simon Duranceau and Fernando Herrera, both of whom work with me representing a company named ROADIS Holdings USA. We have been working on this proposal with Johnny Olson and Tim Harris and his colleagues at Horrocks Engineering. Nobody knows this corridor in terms of transportation needs better than Johnny and Tim. Do you guys want to say hello, Johnny?
Hello, everyone. I've met several of you. Gene, you be nice to me today. It's been a while. But I'd like to thank you guys for having us. And, you know, I-25 has been a passion of mine for a lot of years. I used to go to a lot of NATA meetings and talk about I-25 with Reza and Paul. And I-25 is one of those things that I've made a commitment in my life that said, I am going to work on I-25 North, and that's what I'm going to try to get done for the people of Northern Colorado. And you guys are part of that Northern Colorado. It starts all the way down at segment 1 and it runs up to segment 8. You were all there when we signed the EIS in 2011, December, which I think was a great day. We were there when we built segment 2 and 3. So it's really a exciting time for me to be working with Mike, but thank you for having me.
Thanks, Johnny. That said, let me walk through this quickly. I hope you have on your screen the diagram of the several segments that people talk about I-25 North in terms of. Am I right that everybody sees that? In any event, in describing the proposal that we made several weeks ago to HPTE, after HPTE lifted the moratorium on unsolicited proposals for work on this particular corridor. So we viewed it as almost a solicited, unsolicited proposal. We got together with Johnny and his crew, took a look at the feasibility of accelerating the EIS proposed projects on this. As you all know, segment 1 has been operating for 20 years as the reversible lane down there. Segments 2 and part of segment 3 have been operating or are about to start operating. And as I think Jessica mentioned, there's some real safety problems in those operating segments. Segment 3 extends only at this point to E470. And I think CDOT ran out of money before being able to extend the managed lane up to Highway 7. So part of our proposal would be to complete that extension. We would then move to segment 4, running between Highway 7 and 66, and extend the managed lane throughout that segment. Segment 5, let me jump to segments 6 through 8, which are being worked on now, fully funded by CDOT and within a year or so of completion. Once that combination of segments gets completed, we can then move on and tie the corridor together by completing a managed lane through segment 5. Our proposal envisions, much as US 36 did, a rapid transit, bus rapid transit priority in the express lanes running up and down that corridor between Fort Collins and Denver. We would, in the proposal, accelerate the construction of these infrastructure links that have been sitting on the table for many years. There, as Karen pointed out, there is much concentration these days on green projects, accommodation of electric vehicles, that kind of thing. And our proposal contemplates a full inclusion of those kinds of improvements. Best of all, what we are proposing requires no further CDOT financial contribution, which lets CDOT, I think, then complete projects which in its view have had a little bit higher priority, but given the ability for us to come in and get this done, I think it makes a good deal of sense to CDOT. We'll see. What did I miss, Johnny? What did I miss?
One of the things that we really want to focus on is, the segment 2 stretch and the segment 3. Didn't really complete segment 2. I mean, working with Gene and Reza many years ago to get that existing managed lane put in there with that reduced shoulder. It really helped the congestion in the area, but knowing that that's got to get an inside shoulder and it's got to have safety. And I know NADA's number 1 priority for many years was getting the continuous acceleration lanes up and down the corridor in that area to keep people in that instead of coming in and out. It will really improve the safety of that corridor. Knowing that those criteria are important, but also just working with RTD and making sure these new transit hubs are going to be a big part, especially in that segment 2 area of how do we do the connectivity. You can have a BRT system up and down this corridor, but if you don't have connectivity to those locations, they really don't function for a lot of the people, right? So you still got to get in your car, get to the hub. But if you have transit connectivity and working up and down the corridors, I think that's really going to benefit. And the whole EIS, this is basically based on the EIS that everybody is signed on for so many years. But having that connectivity from north to south and getting rid of the bottlenecks and the safety issues in 3 and 2, that I call that famous last mile in segment 3, the unfinished mile, right? We struggled with that back then, and we tried to find the money, and we all worked together, but that last mile just didn't get finished, and that's critical to this corridor to get the connectivity to move traffic. So those are some of the highlights, I think, in this area that are really going to be important for everybody sitting on this call.
Let me say that, as Karen pointed out, HPTE has a process for evaluating these kinds of proposals. And we were happy when it moved it into HPT, moved the proposal into an evaluation phase. We are hoping that they will continue with that. We are not lobbying in particular for our proposal. But what we're trying to do is get the information out that this is a serious, feasible possibility at this point, connecting finally this corridor in accordance with the EIS that was done 10 years ago. And we want you to know about that. Glad to answer questions. You've got a full agenda, so I don't want to take up too much time here, but we're glad to answer questions.
Do we have any questions?
Yeah, Madam Chair, it's Joe.
Yes.
Hey, hi Johnny, hi Tim, nice to see you guys. And Mike, you don't know me, but I was chairman of the commission back in the early 2000s, and on the initial what did we call it, Karen, when we first did the tolling authority? I forget it, what do we even called it, but I was the first chairman of that tolling authority.
Yeah,
Whatever that was, yeah.
it was the Colorado Tolling Authority, I
There
think.
you go.
Yes.
Yeah. Peggy Catlin was executive director. We all worked very hard to get this whole concept going back 25 years ago, 20 plus years ago.
No, you did.
If it wasn't for what we did back then with the governor and the legislature, and anyway, I'd be curious. So your proposal would be to take over the entire management of this corridor from section 1 all the way to section 8, manage and operate that entire corridor. Is that correct?
Segment
Not-
2 to segment 8.
through 8.
Okay, segment 2 to
Segment one belongs to US 36, part of that project.
Okay, all right, okay, and again, part of what Johnny was mentioning, part of my concern would be the safety improvements. I know there's quite a bit of things along that corridor. I drive up to the Longmont corridor all the time from my daughter's house. There are segments that need pavement, new pavement design, new safety improvements, all those kind of things. I'd be concerned about, trying to do this stuff piecemeal and get this done without doing a similar project to what US 36 was, where it's part and parcel, the entire corridor gets its full upgrade.
So, the first order of business is getting some of those safety improvements done in 2 and 3. It's an awful situation out there. You just, people get killed. It's awful. It's awful.
Yeah, I have to admit, I avoid that segment like the plague,
Yeah.
like the COVID.
Yeah.
I guess
Problem
we
with
can
it is
laugh
it can be
about
virtual.
that now. Yeah.
That's right. We drive it virtual.
Hey, are there any other questions?
Yes, this is Pedro Costa. Hello, Mike. Nice
Hi,
to see
Pedro.
you again.
Nice to see you.
So I was just, I'd like to congratulate your persistence and efforts trying to get this done. I think it's valuable, and I think it's a way to really try to accelerate and get things done. In involving private funding, I think it makes sense when there's no other options. Is this proposal is it the terms will be similar to those that are currently in place for segment 2 in terms of HOV3, or is that still all to be discussed as part of your talks with HPT?
Our expectation is that it would look very much like other express lanes that HPT runs in terms of HOV requirements. All of that can be discussed, but that's our initial, those are our initial assumptions, Pedro.
But is it a 50-year term, or is
That's discussable as well.
Mhm. Okay. Well, I just have one quick comment, and I know Karen understands this as well. in your diagram, actually, the 470 is actually on top of Northwest Parkway. So I just wanted to, I know that a lot of people don't really see any difference, but me being Northwest Parkway, I just take note of that.
I will make sure we make that change because I noticed
So
it too, and I thought to myself,
The
I hope
470
no one
is
brings
correct
that up.
on the right side.
But Pedro, believe
Sensitive to that.
me, we know that, Pedro. We know
No, I
that.
know you do. It's probably the public doesn't, and that's probably what makes more sense for them. But it's been something that a sort of a small grievance that me and Karen has always.
We'll fix that grievance. We will not have that no more.
Thank you and congratulations and nice to meet you, John.
Same here.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions?
Looks like Gene has his hand up.
All right.
Hi, Johnny and Tim. Long time.
Yeah.
The reason I-25 is where it's at is back in the late 50s and 60s, there was a lot of the same discussions about where I-25 should go. And it was decided then to put it basically in the middle of Fort Collins and Greeley and all of these communities along the Front Range because there wasn't enough money to do one along the west side and one along the east side. So I-25 alignment was picked. I think the alignment is what needs to go forward, and I support this with one addition: an envelope for rail needs to be added. Then you have a full package, and I think it'll be easier to get funded. And even if it's a split authority, I still think that I-25 is the best answer versus going over to Boulder and up the back way, which is slower. Thank you.
Thanks, Gene. Is there anyone else that has any questions?
I'd like to make a couple of comments if that's all
Yes.
right. One is, for us, the Highway 7 I-25 interchange is really important. It's supposed to be a diverging diamond. We're supposed to have a mobility hub there, and I understand that that's not part of your proposal. Tell us how this proposal benefits our need to do that diverging diamond and put in a mobility hub.
So would you like me to take that, Mike?
Go ahead.
So one of the things that's critical on this corridor is I think once we start getting the managed lanes in, Karen, and we start getting everything connected, then I think the State Highway 7 interchange, some of these other interchanges along the corridor will start getting more elevation. Right now, we all know, and I'm just going to be blunt, I'm not at CDOT anymore, so I don't have to dance the dance. There's not a lot of funding. This stretch from segment 2 all the way to segment 8 had not seen any funding as everybody else has got funding over the years. I think as we build this and as we put this together, it starts becoming more of meeting the current administration's needs of transit and mobile connectivity and stuff. So what I would say is if this proposal continues to catch legs and this proposal continues to move, I think the reason why we're out talking to the elected officials and letting people know that this is on the table is for you guys to start thinking, if this starts to move forward, what do we need to do to push these initiatives that they can then maybe come together with us? Because you're going to get more economy of scale. If we start building this and somebody wins this corridor, and let's say ROADIS wins it, and all of a sudden there's energy around the corridor, it's easier to bring money to the table now than it is to wait for 5 or 6 years and then lose the economy of scale. So the reason we're doing this is, one, make sure we have support, because one thing I've learned about this corridor, if you don't get support from the very beginning of segment 2 all the way up to segment 8, you're not going anywhere. That's why that I-25 coalition came together. 2, once you get energy behind it and people start seeing the benefits to it and people start talking about it, I think that gens up money and people starting to see different things that they can add to it. So our proposal is not taking care of all the immediate stuff on the sides, just the main corridor, but that's where CDOT or locals or people can work and bring money to the table to start bringing more. And so 7's not off the total list. It's on our list, but we have to really focus on what we're going to do to connect the connectivity so other things can start to bloom.
Thank you. The second thing I'd like to ask you is, you have been up and down this corridor making presentations to the North I-25 Coalition and to others all the way up to segment 8. Can you tell us what kind of feedback you've been getting?
I think it's been good. We have done, I guess this is the second presentation we have done. We have another one scheduled next week. And again, what we're trying to do is to get the information out, see what people's view toward it is. I learned some valuable lessons in working through the US 36 project in terms of transparency and stakeholder interests. And we're trying not to make the same mistakes here as were made there. So it's in our interest to get the information out, collect various points of view. We recognize that HPTE and CDOT have their process, and we're not trying to take the decision away from them. We're hopeful, but we understand they are the deciders. But the beneficiaries of this are the people that we are talking to along the corridor, and I think we'll continue to do that.
Yeah,
Is
a
that
lot of
responsive?
positive.
We're getting
lot of
good
po-
response.
Yeah, there's been a lot of positive thought. I've had a lot of electeds. I'm on several boards up north. I'm on NCLA. I'm on Fix I-25. So when I sit and talk with folks, I get a lot of questions. And one of the things that people always ask me is the details. And I'm like, if I give too many of the details, I can't win the project. So we could give so many of that's why we put this together to share. And like, people are saying, yeah, but what about this? And what about that? And I'm like, patience. And it's hard to have patience when something's out here like this, and elected officials want answers and they want input to what they want. So we also are getting a lot of information that's helping us grow our ideas too. But us, at the same time, we're given enough information that we can to make sure that people feel good. But the comments that I've really heard are segment 2, that I hear about segment 2. Are you going to fix the nightmare and the safety issue? Yes. Are you going to, because really from segment 5 up to segment 8, it's the 2+1, not the 3+1 that's in the EIS. When is the 3+1 going to come? When is the US 34, State Highway 7, State Highway 14 interchanges going to come? And those are the questions that are starting to pop up. But that's where the advantages of an RFP, if it gets to that page, we won't want to give too much of that information. We know they're there. We know that there's information there. We know there's things that got to be done. But the positivity has just been, someone's like, finally, we're going to get this thing finished. Because if everybody remembers, some RTD back many years ago left segment 5 for the last segment. There was many reasons for that, because the other segments were falling apart and everything else. But the bottleneck there is going to cause significant problems. And this has to get done, or you don't have a continuous bus, a continuous managed lane and transit system. So it's really starting to gain a lot of positive movement up north.
What kind of conversations have you had with the Regional Transportation District, who taxes us in this North Metro area for transit service, but the transit service only goes to 120th? And I know part of the EA that we all signed considered a center loading platform at 88th, or a rebuild of the 88th bridge. Have you had conversations with RTD yet, or is it too soon?
We have, I'm not sure who's asking that question, but it doesn't matter. So the ROADIS group has had 3 or 4 over the last 6 months, I would say, conversations with RTD board members who have indicated a good deal of interest in having the completion of the North Line financed by ROADIS. And we have had invitations to go in and talk to the director, and have been asked to be ready for that when they invite us. And that's where we have been at this point. It's a project we would like to take a look at as being able to finance.
What about I-25, Mike? I think the I-25 piece, you know, we, CDOT and locals have had conversations with RTD about that center loading platform on that segment 2 piece.
Right.
And so I'm just wondering if the conversations have been with the Regional Transportation District service planners or anybody else who's looking at that center loading platform architecture on segment 2. Have you had those discussions yet? Those might be interesting discussions.
We have not. We have not. That is a discussion we're going to have to have when and if HPT moves this along.
We have some wonderful ideas for those.
Yep.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. Looks like Gene has his hand up, Chair.
All right, Jean?
I'd like to suggest that for next month's meeting, we have a resolution that supports these improvements along with having the commuter rail along I-25 also. That way we will show our support, address Jessica's issue, and to have this body take a position on supporting these 2 items.
All right. Are there any other questions?
Jessica has her hand up.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. Jean, I appreciate that. I would hesitate to take a stance at this point without having a bigger conversation with probably some of the other stakeholders in the region.
Kyle has his hand up.
Kyle?
Yeah, actually, I think I'm inclined to move with Jean's idea. Perhaps a little more information would be helpful, but it's hard for me to see anything here that would really be not supportable. And so my questions, I got a few. First would be, what does ROADIS believe the political opposition, if any, where is that going to come from? Secondly, I have to think that you have a hoped for time frame when this gets implemented. So would love to hear what that is. And then thirdly, just to confirm what I think I heard in response to Karen's question, this design does not preclude the mobility hubs that are anticipated for the corridor. So I guess 3 questions there.
So let me start backwards. It does not preclude. And in fact, I think we will try to accommodate as part of the design. In terms of the time schedule, that depends totally on HPTE and CDOT. We're ready to sit down and start talking now, but they have a process, and we're trying to work with that. We expect to hear within the next 30 days whether they will move us along in the process. I should emphasize that regardless, our expectation is that CDOT will compete our proposal. So we are not expecting a sole source designation on this. You know, it would be nice, but we're not expecting that. And so we will end up in a competition at some point. Those take a while to put together internally. So we would hope, I think, to have a good idea of what exactly will happen when, sometime by the third quarter of this year. And in terms of opposition, we haven't heard it yet. We haven't heard it yet.
The only opposition that I know that's going to be out there is the current environment to not add additional lanes. That has strongly been in the paper recently, and we need to add no additional lanes. We don't want to add lanes. We want to put more people in transit. Well, this corridor needs that lane to have a transit system. So it really, we don't know how that's gonna play out. But the current environment of reduction of GHGs, the electric charging stations, the mobility, connectivity and mobility issue, making sure it has a multimodal kind of concept. I think those are where the details will come in. So I want to sort of step through a little bit of the process. So they look at it from merit, right? Phase one. And so it passed the merit phase. Now it's they're looking at is it valid? And then they ask us questions. So they bring a team together to evaluate the proposal in detail. And then they ask us questions. If they pass the HPTE board passes it after that team reviews it through it's valid, then it goes to an RFQ where they then go out and say, who's interested in this and what teams do you bring? If this goes to that phase, ROADIS, that's the only phase ROADIS won't have to do. So we're doing all the pre-work. We get to skip the RFQ and then they go to the RFP where then they start looking for ideas and all the details to see who's the best qualified, who brings the money, what are the ideas that are going to be presented, who's the teams. Then that process is where Mike's talking that we will have to compete. That's just transparency, and with the new transparency that CDOT's bringing to the table, it'll be very open and transparent of what's selected and who's selected. So we're doing a lot of the upfront legwork, ROADIS and Horrocks, but at the end of the day, it will be a very heavily competed corridor, and who brings the most and the best proposal to the table. So I think the only opposition would be if that process didn't follow with the current environment down at the Hill of transparency and who wins it and who doesn't and why they want it, those types of things. But right now it's just out there. It's just in space right now, and it hasn't came down specifically to this. But the thing that Mike brought up earlier is there's been 19 proposals or 18 proposals are submitted to CDOT that never made it past phase one in the last 6 months. So there's not any that have followed the full process. And all we're really looking for is follow the process. If we can get through the process, then we can compete. And then I-25 gets done. And that's really what we're really looking for now.
So Johnny, assuming that everyone follows the process, best case scenario for when there could be shovels in the ground, are we talking 2 years away, 3 years away, 5 years away? Just give us a sense of that if you could.
And it'll really be dependent on CDOT. But then the reason let me explain that why. So they go out with an RFP, then they got to put a contract process together. Let's say they go out with an RFP fourth quarter. That RFP will take 3 to 6 weeks, or maybe even a little bit longer. Then that takes six weeks to review. So you're into first quarter of next year. Then they have the review, and then the contract packages then have to be built. So you're realistically looking at contracts not being signed until about the fourth quarter of 22. And then probably by then, the contractors and the concessionaires will already be working on design. There's some stuff that already has some design. Segment 3's got 30% already. And then what happens is there'll be early projects that come out to get things moving quick. So if that December timeframe contracts are signed, there should be some design so contractors can start moving towards segment 2 or some of the finish in segment 3. Those would probably be the high level quick hits. So you're looking at shovels in the ground January of 23 if everything runs smooth.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Don't hold me perfectly to that, but that's a ballpark.
Gosh, this has been great, hasn't it, Chair?
Yes, absolutely. Any other questions for them?
Thank you for your time. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate the presentation. So
Thank you
interesting.
very much.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.